We're here today to give you a briefing on staff's recommendations for the streets to be included in the Real Texas Road Program through fiscal year 2021. So we're bringing a much larger group of streets this time, so we have a better plan for multiple years going out. And I'm going to start with how we selected the streets that we're bringing you here. First, we calculate a priority score. I'm going to go through this very quickly. So every street in the city that's eligible for this program, and by eligible I mean 2-lane residential roads, has a priority score calculated. This is based 50% off of the pavement condition index. That was done in 2017. That's the data we're using. We had an outside consultant come in. They rated the entire city. It's based on the type of distresses and how that affects the pavement in its life. The other 50% of that priority score is based off of traffic and safety factors. So if a street is adjacent to a park or a school, or it's a collector, acts more like a collector in and out of the neighborhood, that would have a higher factor. A new factor we use this year is the International Roughness Index, and that's basically an indicator of how it feels to the driver. So the bumpier the road, the higher that factor is going to be. That was a new data point we were able to collect when we did that 2017 assessment. So we take all of that, and every street is given a priority score. After that, we put the streets into repair groups. So this is a manual kind of grouping. Just if we were going to go do a street, what other streets would we be expected to repair at the same time? This helps us decrease mobilization costs. The contractor's not moving all over the place. We think it's better for the resident. We're not coming in every year. We go in, we get it done, we leave the area. And it does speed up productivity when everything is in one place. So then every group, a priority score is calculated per that group, and that's what you see here are the groupings of the city. And then at that point, we determine how much funding we think, and again, this study was done through fiscal year 2021, so how much funding is available, and we just go down that list and choose the groupings of the street. So this screen right here shows you the streets recommended to be included in the next round of the RTR program. One thing I want to point out is we group the whole neighborhood, so every street in that group is shown on this. That doesn't mean that every street is a grade 4 or that every street in that group needs the same level of effort, and I'll touch more on that in a little bit, but we did want to include the whole grouping. I'm going to go through, there's some blow-ups and they are in your handout, looking at each individual council district, just so you can see a better view of what streets those are selected. And that's District 2, District 3, District 4, District 5, and District 6. So you have them in your handout, you can look at them more closely. So now to talk about what we're proposing to do on all of these streets. So again, like I said, we did the whole neighborhood, but we're not planning on doing the same thing on every street within the neighborhood. Our goals that we're proposing is that we look at the grade 4 streets and we put the most effort onto those streets, the most amount of construction, where we actually go through, we do a large amount of work on all the streets, the curb and gutter, sidewalks, driveway aprons, alley approaches. But we don't disregard the grade 3, 2s, and 1 streets, so the better streets that are in that neighborhood, we'll go and we will look. And if there's a big pothole and the rest of the street is good, we're going to go and fix that pothole while we're in that neighborhood. And that way we are touching every street in those groups, but some streets may not, they'll have a lot less work done on them. And then the method that's selected, I have a couple of slides to show you. So we've seen increased construction costs in everything, and so streets falls into that category. And as staff, in order to fight these construction costs, we're trying to implement more tools in our toolbox. So what other methods can we use to fix some of these streets that may not need the same level that we've been doing? So this kind of shows you where we'd like to go at a staff level. So that was a citywide analysis I showed you that picked all these streets. What we would do next, if after we get direction from councils, we'd go look on an individual street basis. What we want to do is we want to stay at the top of this list. So you can see the cost increase as we go down the list. So we'd look at the street, and our first choice would be to do localized full depth repair. And that would be it. We'd fix the bad parts of the street. We'd leave the good parts of the street intact. And if we can bring that street back up to a high grade 2, a grade 1, then that's the method we'd like to do. If the street, if we cannot use that method on that particular street, then we'd go to the next option, which is the full depth repair with an asphalt overlay. A lot of streets that have an existing asphalt overlay, we wouldn't be able to just mill off the asphalt and put nothing back. The surface would be all scratched up when we took that off. So we would have to do that. If the street can't be fixed with that, we would move to the next one, which is the localized full depth repair with concrete overlay. And then we do have some streets where none of those methods are going to work, and we'll have to go to full reconstruction. But the cost increases as we go down the list. So we think we can hit a lot of these streets staying at that top and the top 2, and that's what we'd like to focus on. Again, construction costs are rising. There was an expectation of what we were going to address with this money, and we're really trying to figure out how do we meet that expectation.
So Christina, before you leave here, so you're looking at, in some respects, changing what we're doing not necessarily doing it, well, let me say it a different way. So you're looking at, for example, you may have a street that you show up there on the right that currently the last 4 years we've milled off all of it pretty much. We haven't done this. We've milled it all and gone back and repaired and or replaced. And so you're coming to the council and you're saying, hey, if we come into a street that's considered grade 4, but we find out that only half of it or one side of it's that way, you're telling us this is what you would like to do for that one example. And then if the street, let me finish up, and if it has asphalt overlaid concrete today, we may have gone back with concrete in the past 4 years, but now we want to say if it has asphalt, you want to go back with the asphalt the way it's been. Is that kind of what you're asking?
Yes. As we've developed this program, the short answer is yes.
Okay.
As we developed the program, we've been doing more and more full depth repair based on the report we had with the outside study.
Right.
And so what we've found out is we are full depth repairing a large portion of these streets already.
Okay.
The difference is you're going to see the street end up like that corner. But it's a good, solid street. And you give it 2 years and the concrete will fade and it will, it'll blend in and match. But yes, that is what we're asking for.
Okay. Just making sure. I have had some of those calls that I've had that people say, why you left a section that looks funny, it looks like a checkerboard. Why do we, so it helps us to be able to explain, because that section's not eroded or bad. We don't want to tear it out just to make the color look the same.
Right. We're trying to use the dollars in the best way we can and make sure we leave this. We're not trying to lessen the product that we're giving you, maybe in terms of aesthetics, but in terms of the structural capacity of the street, I think we're going to give you the same product.
Okay.
And then this is for asphalt streets. It's similar in how we're hoping to approach the problem, but the methods that we would use on an asphalt street are a little bit different. There's full depth repair. Most of our asphalt streets, and the part we're doing in Valley View Heights a lot, is going to asphalt reclamation. This is pretty close to a full reconstruction, except for we're trying to salvage curb and gutter. But the actual pavement, we blend in the asphalt, we mix cement, we mix lime in, we get a whole new base, and then we put a whole new asphalt on top of it. So it's pretty close, but we're not changing configuration. We're trying to salvage what we can salvage. Or not salvage, that preserve what what can be preserved. Okay. So the next steps is we're seeking direction from council on if our recommendations on both the street selection and how we're going to approach the rehab methods. Any changes that you want to see, once we get those, we'll go and we'll assess the streets individually. A lot of this stuff is designed in-house. We have to do some utility work in some of these areas, which will dictate which groups go before the other ones. So we coordinate with our utilities group, and then we'll start bidding out neighborhoods as we get them ready. So we're not going to wait till we have the whole package ready and bid it out. We'll bid it out as we get it ready so we can start moving.
That was kind of one of the concerns we had talked about. The other question everybody around this table gets is, when is mine going to be done? And I think that's one of the things that we would want. I know, I say I, but I think it's us. There's some kind of an idea of when, and we're obviously moving to the 6 districts, which you've already got isolated on here, knowing planning-wise when that neighborhood, if it's 2020, 2021, 2022, but being able to say it is in this queue and we are moving in that direction, I think is paramount.
Mayor, to that point, I believe because we are taking on so many streets over a 3-year period, where it's different than what we have done year to year. So we will be able to provide a schedule with some estimated timeframes of when. So we will put that as part of our Real Texas Roads education.
Yes, sir.
And Mayor, I'm going to piggyback on what you said, and I agree. However, it's important also that we communicate to neighborhoods that if it's going to be a couple of 3 years for them and they've got some significant issues, I'd like to see us continue to have some type of plan to do some type of interim work. And I know it's all costly, but I don't want them to feel like, well, we're just stuck with moon craters for the next 3 years. So I want us to make sure that we're communicating about those particular issues as well.
And that's what we are doing. We're not letting roads sit. We are making repairs, but we are doing more temporary patchwork, which does not last. And when you have 70 inches of rain, it tends to wash out a lot of the work. But we are committed to making the roads drive as smooth as possible until we get in and do the Real Texas Road work.
And so a question with that, when do we think that we'll have an idea of this timeline?
Based on your direction, I'm going to let Christina answer that.
Yeah, so we've begun preliminary discussions. We've begun preliminary coordination with utilities. I have a pretty good idea. We just didn't put anything in writing until we made sure we had recommendations from you guys. We have to get a plan in action because some of this involves utility work, which we have to get out ahead. So we've already started. I think we have a pretty good idea of where we can move to first and what utilities have to be done. So I don't know if you want to commit to a date. I mean, I would think
We'll get
a couple of months.
We'll get something to y'all before the end of the year.
Yeah, we just need a plan.
Yes.
I mean, we go to these meetings, everyone around the table goes to meetings, and people ask, when are you going to fix my street? And that's all
Yes.
we're asking for. Deputy Mayor Pro Tem's got a lot on.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm looking at the street selection here, and I will say straight off, I appreciate Hollow Bend being on there and added there. That is a significant road that needs some a definite redo, and those streets in those areas. That street and those side streets there definitely are suffering through a failure. If they're not a 4, they're probably even worse. I'll take issue, however, I'm not going to pound the table or anything. I'm just going to say straight out that I got a picture here of Derby in Rollingwood Hills, and it's dirt and gravel. The concrete is completely gone, and it's just utterly unacceptable. Rollingwood Hills, Darien, Menlo, all these streets have to be done now, and they have to be a priority. And I will tell you, if they're not included in this current set, and I understand 1, 2, 3 years, and I understand the staging of utilities, but if a significant number of the Rollingwood Hill streets aren't included in this program, and it's not, what I'm telling you is that I've been in all these streets, and those streets need replacement first, not a part of this. I'll tell you right now, I won't even vote for this. if a significant part of the Rolling Wood Hills streets aren't included in this program. They're going to dirt, they're going to gravel, there's rebar sticking out. There's holes that are so big that you have to drive around it. You can't even drive them. There are no patches, or the patchwork has failed completely. And this street selection, I understand the basis of it, and I know we may need to move some stuff around, but this, without some of these significant streets in Rolling Wood Hills not being a part of it, it's unacceptable to me, and I will not support.
Mr. Miklos, are you saying that they're not included in the next 3 years? I just want to make sure.
But it looks, I'm making sure.
This is
just 1 year?
No, this is showing for the next 3 years.
That's
what our
right, it
plan
needs
is.
to be included in the next 3
Now,
years, is
roll-
what I'm saying.
We have a larger report that is
Thank you. If I'm
not only the
mistaken,
next
I
3
just wanna make
years,
sure.
but to the completion of the program. The Rolling Wood Hills area is an area that we've looked at for fiscal year 22-23, so it would be the last 2 years of the program. We could rearrange that, obviously, if that's council's direction to include Rolling Wood Hills, but that means some of the other ones that are currently on your mapping would have to be pulled off to meet the funding. So it's a matter of, it's a zero-sum game where if we move into Rolling Wood Hills, we have to pull some streets out.
No, and I understand the finite element of this and how there is a Sophie's Choice sort of portion to this. I'm looking at this, and there are some streets that are bad, but not nearly as bad. And I'll tell you, Derby not being on here, Darien, some of these streets not being on here, especially at their entrances with military, and we know why, because there's a certain gradation.
Right.
But I'll tell you, without those streets are basically undrivable, whereas some of these other streets are significantly damaged. But if we're queuing them, the Rolling Wood Hill streets have got to come first because they have basically become undrivable in certain areas. So yes, I am asking you to look at reapportionment of these, and I understand that there's a finite element to this. I'm not saying fix them all at the same time. I understand that. There's a certain reapportionment that you're going to need to do.
Yes, sir.
But I mean, I've been all over this district, and I'll tell you, we cannot not fix these Rolling Wood Hill streets as part of the first set.
We'll sit down with Mr. Kahili and we'll make adjustments.
And just, Matt, just to clarify, because we did have this discussion, we are looking at 2 to 3 years' worth of utility work alone in Rolling Wood Hills due to the age of the structure. So that was one of the reasons why they were pushed off.
Totally understand that, and you know what? The citizens understand that too. They understand that if you have to get out underground and redo a sewer line or a water main, that you're not going to redo a road and then tear it up 6 months later and then
Right.
redo it again. They totally get this. So if you have to do utility work out there first, they understand and totally get that. But we've got to get to those particular roads as soon as. I mean, they are in failure mode. They are in undrivable mode versus some of these other streets that are bad. But, I mean, it's a relativeness, and I understand finite resources, got it.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple of things I wanted to get my 2 cents on. Mr. Kahili, we've discussed this numerous times before, and I'm just going to stay stubborn on this, is that as we move forward with this Rural Texas Rail process, I very much want to see us go into each neighborhood and begin with a neighborhood meeting and communicate with the residents specific things like if it's only going to be half the neighborhood, for example, like Northridge and El Rosa, or parts of Casa View over by the Shands Vanston area where one half 1 year, the next couple of years come to the other half, all reasonable things.
All Galloway.
Yes.
Galloway Elementary neighborhood.
Many times people have said, why not Clary? How come Clary didn't get done?
Correct.
I want us to make sure we communicate those things very well with residents, because sometimes, from what residents have told me over and over, just the flyers and the door hangers sometimes just don't seem to provide the same communication. Things like if we're going to go in and scrape a section of streets, and then we're going to be gone for 2 or 3 months, we need to be able to explain to folks why and give them at least a rough idea of when we're coming back. And that may be a perfectly acceptable way to get those things done if the contractors have other priorities or other areas they've got to get to, but people deserve to know, my gosh, this is even worse than it was before they started scraping it. When are they ever coming back? The signs, the parking, there's always lots of confusion and frustration about those things. So I just want to make sure as we move forward, and we've discussed this before, that we continue to get better at communicating those details with the residents. And some you won't get to, some there's just no way to get to all of them, but whatever we can do to keep getting that information out to them, I think, as you said, more folks will be understanding and accepting of what they're having to endure if they're being empowered with information. So
Yes, sir.
it's very important to me. Please, sir. Thank you, Mayor.
Yes, sir. Councilman Brewer.
Yes, sir. Matt, I had a man asked me a question the other day. When we're redoing these roads and stuff, I know that we're doing water and sewer lines and stuff. What about our gas lines? Are any gas lines being in the front of where the streets are being done, or all the gas lines in the rear of the houses?
But most of our older neighborhoods, which is where the concentration of the Grade 4 streets are located, have those gas lines in the alleys. Some cases, those alleys are unpaved, sometimes they're paved, but the majority of the gas services in the city are in these alleys. So it really doesn't affect, to a large degree, our street selection. And the Atmos Gas has been proactive in going through, and they've replaced virtually every service line from the main to the meter throughout the city. They had a program some years back when they got some bad publicity. They had some leaks and so forth that caused problems. And they came through through the city of Mesquite in about a 2 to 3 year process and replaced every gas service in the entire city of Mesquite with more modern materials.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Holzapple, with this new method selection that you're doing and the street bond program, you're going to be able to, and I know the cost, the expense that's going up and everything, you'll still be able to do as many streets as was being planned to do before, as many streets?
We're absolutely going to attempt to do that. We think we're going to get very close, if not meet, that 100-mile street that we've been targeting and what we've been telling the citizens. Without the modification of the methods and giving us more tools in our toolbox, I don't think we would be able to do that. With the engineering report that we received that the council asked for and that was delivered to the council, it did modify some of our construction methods. Because of that, it did raise prices a little bit. And it's caused some of the difficulty we've had in these neighborhoods. If you recall, one of the recommendations is that concrete overlay not be placed during the hot Texas summers because it caused issues with the bonding between the new concrete and the old concrete. That's been kind of what we've run into the last couple months, where we've had to stand down in some neighborhoods because the weather was too hot to pursue that concrete overlay. So we are going to be using different methods. We think it'll make the work go faster without those delays that we've experienced this summer in some of these neighborhoods. It will help us basically target the type of repair to what we're seeing on each individual street, and therefore use the citizen taxpayer dollars to the best possible effect.
And with the streets that are being chosen, you'll be doing sidewalks by selection as well?
We'll be doing sidewalks. The worst of the sidewalks, we're not going to, again, like the streets, we're not going to go through and replace all the sidewalks just because we're there, but we will look at every single street individually. Remember, this selection's done on a survey that was done by a consultant. That's basically a sampling. So they look at basically one panel, 20-foot section of street in every 200 plus feet of street. So it's getting a snapshot, and it gives us an idea of where the worst streets are. But it's certainly not looking at the street in a comprehensive, detailed way. That's what we'll be doing as we're putting the bid packages together, that will tailor the bid packages specifically to what we see out in the field as we're putting those bid packages together.
And how about the corners of the streets, making them handicap accessible? Are we going to be doing that?
We will be doing that. Federal law requires us to put in the handicap ramps at the corners whenever we touch a street. So those will definitely be getting done, sir.
And on your slide there about method selection, concrete streets, under full reconstruction, concrete streets, is that going to be concrete full construction? Or is that going to be asphalt full construction?
It varies. If it's an asphalt street, we'll go back in, as Christina mentioned. We'll, try and preserve those sections that are still in good shape as far as curb and gutter, drive approaches, and so forth, and we'll be reconstructing the asphalt pavement and subgrade underneath that. If it's a concrete street and it needs full reconstruction, like we just brought to you a package for South Parkway. South Parkway is too far gone to utilize any of these methods other than full reconstruction. And there are other streets in the Real Texas Road Program. We're doing Potter Lane, I believe. Powell Lane, similar. We brought a contract to council that you approved for full redesign and reconstruction. It's just the street is in such poor shape that that's the only method that really makes sense in those type of situations. But again, we'll look at those case by case, and if we run into a situation where there's a street, a full street, or maybe even portions of a street that require that type of method, then we'll do that. We're doing that even now. There are sections in the Northridge addition, just to the north of this building, that we're getting in there and we're saying, well, these pieces are too far gone. The overlay method is not appropriate, and we're just rebuilding them, basically. So, we're looking and trying to tailor each reconstruction method to what we're seeing in the field. Part of the problem you have to also remember is as we get into these streets, what we find in some cases, the street original construction is not as thick as we thought it was. They're all supposed to be at least 5 inches thick. Some of them we're getting into, and as we start doing the full depth repair, we're going, oh my goodness, there's only 3 inches of concrete here. So, as we get into those field conditions, sometimes we have to call an audible and do what's right for that neighborhood.
Thank you.
Mayor, if I may also, you bring up an important point, and I understand that, early on, as we have the street bond committee, and then the council got behind it, perhaps none of us knew the deterioration of some of the areas below or underneath the surface. I guess my question is, now that we've been learning what we've been learning, and this is where I would need your expertise as an engineer, 5, 10, 15 years, when most of us maybe aren't even around this table, if we do this again, if the community votes for another bond package for grade 4 worst roads, do we feel like we've learned enough that we'll be able to pinpoint those rougher sections in the future that we couldn't do this time around? I'm just curious if
I think so.
Discuss that or the possibility.
I think so, but I think also, we talked about that, that beautiful graph I showed you about spending $1 early on the life of a pavement, early on in its life cycle, has a lot of, you'll get more bang for your buck rather than wait till those streets deteriorate to grade 4. And as Christina mentioned, when we're putting these groupings together, when we hit a neighborhood with this new plan, we're not just going to touch the grade 4 streets. That's where most of the money will go, because that's, it's going to take more money to fix a grade 4 street. But we also want to touch the grade 3s and 2s, and if we see, a panel here or a panel there, or there's a wheelchair ramp needed here, okay, we're going to touch the entire neighborhood to some level. Obviously, if it's already a grade 2 or a low grade 1, it's probably going to get very minimal work and very little dollars being spent there. But we're spending that dollars early on, so we're not having to spend the $10 or $20 when it becomes a grade 4, 15 years later. So we're going to hit every street in the neighborhood to some degree when we come into that neighborhood.
So this plan then, what I think I'm hearing is, in the future, there just won't be as many severe grade 4s as what we've had to run into the last 5 or 6 years.
If we're doing our job right, that's exactly what,
okay,
you're right
good.
On track, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor.
Any other questions on this item? And you'll be coming back to us with the plan then, based on, I hear everybody's.
We'll move forward with this. We'll make some adjustments. We'll consult with Mr. Kahili to make some adjustments, and we'll probably put something out in a memo to you all so you can see the final selection.
I can give you a list of the people that have called me, and they want their streets done right now, too. So
I understand, sir.
Just so you know, I have a list. It's a running list I try to work off of. Thank you all for your presentation today and tonight.